I overheard and found out that my wife was cheating on me and wanted to take half of my property. So I transferred all the money to an offshore account and ran away. I never expected to have a good day at work, but today was something else. It started with my boss, Mr. Hargrove, reaming me out in front of everyone for a mistake I didn't even make. Some idiot in accounting messed up the numbers, but since I was the one presenting the report, I got the heat. Hargrove didn't care about explanations. He just wanted someone to blame. By the time I left the office, I felt like I had a boulder sitting on my chest. The drive home was a blur. I barely registered the traffic, the honking, or the radio murmuring in the background. I just wanted to get inside, take a shower, and forget this day ever happened. But as I pulled up to my house, something was off. My driveway was blocked by a familiar blue Toyota Corolla, Debbie's car. Amanda's sister. It was odd for Debbie to be here on a random weekday evening. She and Amanda weren't that close, and when they did talk, it was usually over the phone. Maybe she just stopped by for a quick visit. But still, she could have parked on the street instead of blocking me in. I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, pausing at the door. It was slightly ajar. I frowned. Then, I heard voices. I was about to call out to Amanda, but something stopped me. I don't know what, maybe instinct, maybe the tone of her voice. I stepped closer, just out of sight. 3 times in one day, Amanda was saying, her voice low but full of smug amusement. I felt a chill. Debbie let out a short, shocked laugh. Amanda, are you serious? You actually went through with it? I did, Amanda said. God, I forgot how good he was. Nick has no idea. And the best part? I didn't even have to sneak around much. He's so busy with work. He barely notices anything anymore. I stopped breathing. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. Who the hell was she talking about? Trevor. She said his name like it was a joke, like it was some inside secret between her and Debbie. Trevor, her ex, the guy she swore she had no feelings for anymore. The one she said was a mistake from the past, and she slept with him 3 times. In one day, my hands curled into fists. My stomach turned to ice. You have to be careful, Debbie said, her voice lower now. If Nick finds out. Oh, please, Amanda scoffed. I'm not stupid. I know exactly what I'm doing. And honestly, I think I'm ready to just end this marriage. I mean, he's a good provider and all, but I can do better. Better? Besides, she continued, I talked to a lawyer already. If I play my cards right, I can get half of everything. Maybe even the house. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She was planning to leave me. Not just leave me. She was planning to take everything. The car. The house. My money. My life. And she was laughing about it. Jesus, Amanda, Debbie said. But there was no real disapproval in her tone. If anything, she sounded entertained. You're ruthless. Amanda laughed. I know. But honestly, Nick's kind of pathetic. He still thinks I love him. My vision blurred. I had to get out of there. I turned around and walked back to my car, my mind racing. I didn't even register the sound of my breathing until I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Sitting in my car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, I felt like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare. Amanda wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to rip my life apart, laughing about it like it was some kind of game. And Debbie? She wasn't just a bystander. She was complicit, entertained by the whole thing. I wasn't going to give Amanda the chance to destroy me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. Storming into the house and confronting her would be stupid. She'd lie, manipulate, twist things around until I was the bad guy. I'd seen her do it before, to friends, to coworkers, even to me in smaller ways. No, I wasn't giving her that opportunity. I needed to be smart. I needed to disappear before she even realized I was gone. I grabbed my phone and opened the banking app. Years of careful investing had put me in a very comfortable position. Amanda had no idea how much I was really worth. She thought she was walking away with half of a comfortable middle-class life. What she didn't know was that I had over $7 million sitting in investments, quietly growing, untouched. I had never told her because I knew exactly the kind of person she was deep down. I had ignored the red flags, but I hadn't been completely blind. I transferred everything into an offshore account I had set up years ago, just in case. A part of me had always been preparing for something like this, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself. The moment the funds cleared, I closed every account Amanda had access to, our shared checking, savings, the credit cards. If she tried to spend a single dime, she'd be met with declined transactions. I couldn't stay in the house that night. I didn't want to risk Amanda walking into the living room and seeing me awake, looking suspicious. I needed a safe place to stay while I figured out my next move. There was only one person I could trust: George. I pulled out my phone and called him. "Nick? What's up, man?" "I need a favor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "A big one. Can I come over?" There was a pause. "You sound weird. Everything okay?" "Not even close." "Get here now," he said immediately. Doors open. George had been my closest friend since college. He wasn't the type to ask a million questions when you told him you needed help. He just helped. I drove over in complete silence, my mind running through the steps ahead. When I pulled into George's driveway, he was already outside, arms crossed, looking concerned. "Talk," he said as soon as I stepped out. I told him everything. By the time I finished, George looked like he wanted to throw up. "Jesus Christ, man. I can't stay here," I said. "She's going to come after me when she realizes the money is gone. I need to disappear." George nodded. "You have a plan?" "I need a car. Something old, something that won't draw attention. I can't take my Tesla. She'll track it." George scratched his chin. "I have my old SUV sitting in the garage. Runs fine, just needs gas. It's unregistered under my name now, so no one will be able to trace it back to you." "Perfect," I said. "What about your phone? Cards?" "Turning them all off. Amanda won't be able to track my spending." George exhaled. "This is insane, but I get it. You're doing the right thing. You need to vanish before she ruins you." I shook his hand. "Thanks, man. I mean it." An hour later, I had traded in my Tesla for George's SUV, disabled my phone's GPS, and packed everything I could fit into a single duffel bag: clothes, cash, and a few personal items I couldn't leave behind. By the time I pulled onto the highway, heading out of the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I drove for hours, leaving behind everything I had ever known. The city lights faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by long, empty highways stretching endlessly ahead. I had no plan, no destination, just an overwhelming need to get as far away from Amanda as possible before she realized I was gone. My phone was off, my credit cards canceled. If Amanda tried to track me, she'd hit a dead end. But the paranoia still sat heavy in my chest. How long before she realized the accounts were drained? How long before she tried to hunt me down? By the time I hit the Colorado state line, exhaustion was creeping in. My SUV rattled over the uneven roads, the worn tires humming beneath me. I wasn't used to driving something this old, but it felt right, untraceable, anonymous. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and steady against the night sky. I had never been the type to seek out nature, but something about the open landscape felt safe, like a place where no one could find me. I needed a place to stop, somewhere quiet, a town where no one asked questions. A few miles ahead, I spotted a road sign: Willow Creek, 12 miles. That was as good a place as any. The town was small, the kind of place that looked frozen in time. One main street, a gas station, a handful of shops. The type of town where people still wave to each other on the sidewalks. The kind of place Amanda would never think to look. I pulled into a diner on the edge of town, the neon open sign buzzing softly in the window. My stomach twisted with hunger, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday. Inside, the place smelled like coffee and bacon grease. A waitress in her 60s, name tag reading Barb, was wiping down a booth. She glanced up as I walked in, her eyes taking me in for a second before giving a polite smile. "Anywhere you like, hon." I slid into a booth near the window, keeping my back to the wall. I didn't know why. I wasn't running from the law, but something in me needed to see the door at all times. I ordered coffee and a burger, barely listening as the handful of other diners talked in low murmurs. Then, a conversation at the next booth caught my attention. An elderly couple sat across from each other, their voices hushed but urgent. The man, who looked to be in his 70s, had a weathered face and the kind of rough hands that spoke of a lifetime of work. His wife, equally worn but kind-looking, leaned forward. "I just don't know what we're gonna do, Harold." The woman, Martha, I overheard, whispered. "We can't keep running the ranch by ourselves. Not at our age." "We'll find someone," Harold muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. "Gotta be somebody in town who's looking for work." "Nobody wants to work for just room and board these days," Martha sighed. "And we can't afford to pay much." I sat up a little. Room and board. I had no idea how to work on a ranch, but I had 2 hands and a desperate need for a place to disappear. I cleared my throat and turned toward them. "Excuse me." I couldn't help overhearing. You need help on your ranch? Harold and Martha looked over, surprised. You got ranch experience, son? Harold asked, raising a skeptical brow. I hesitated. Not exactly, but I'm a hard worker. I learn fast. Martha studied me for a moment, then exchanged a glance with Harold. You got a place to stay? No, I admitted. Just passing through. Harold rubbed his jaw. We can't pay much. Just food and a bed in the guest house. It's nothing fancy. That works for me. Martha still looked hesitant, but something in my face must have convinced her. She nodded slowly. All right then. You can come by in the morning. See if ranch life suits you. I shook Harold's hand, sealing the deal. The next morning, I followed them out to the ranch, a sprawling stretch of land nestled against the foothills. It was beautiful in a rugged kind of way. Wide open fields, rolling pastures, a weathered red barn standing in the distance. Harold handed me a pair of gloves and wasted no time putting me to work. The first few days were brutal. My hands, used to keyboards and steering wheels, blistered from hauling hay and fixing fences. The sun beat down, relentless, as I stumbled through learning how to handle cattle, shovel manure, and operate equipment I had never touched in my life. I met Luis, a seasoned ranch hand who had been with Harold and Martha for years. He was in his late 50s, built like a brick wall, with a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of an army drill sergeant. You're soft, he grunted after watching me struggle to saddle a horse. City boy hands. They'll toughen up. I wanted to snap back, but I was too damn exhausted. Over the next few weeks, Luis taught me everything. How to move cattle, how to ride properly, how to fix things without overthinking them. He didn't have patience for mistakes, but when I got something right, he'd give me a rare nod of approval. At night, I crashed in the guest house, muscles aching, hands sore, but for the first time in years, my mind was quiet. No Amanda, no betrayals, just the exhaustion of honest work. I wasn't sure how long I'd stay, but for now, this was home. It had been a little over a month since I started working at Harold and Martha's ranch, and the days had fallen into a steady rhythm. The early mornings were brutal. The work was harder than anything I had ever done, but something about it felt right. My hands were no longer soft and uncalloused. The blisters had turned to thickened skin. My body had adapted, and my mind had finally started to quiet down. Amanda hadn't found me yet. I told myself she wouldn't. I had covered my tracks too well. No credit cards, no phone tracking, no way to trace me to this place unless she was willing to go town to town, asking for a man who no longer existed. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about my bank account, my car, my reputation, or the constant pressure of keeping up an image I no longer cared about. Here, I was just Nick, the ranch hand. Then she arrived. I was in the middle of fixing a broken fence post when I heard a car pull up. It wasn't just any car. It was a sleek, silver Audi SUV, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a place like this. I glanced up just as the driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, with dark chestnut hair that fell past her shoulders, sharp brown eyes that instantly locked onto me with suspicion. She was beautiful in a way that didn't feel delicate. Her features were striking, confident. The tension hit me before she even spoke. She shut the car door a little too hard and looked around before settling her gaze on me again. You must be the new help, she said, voice clipped. I straightened. And you must be Sophia. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she wasn't expecting me to know her name. I wasn't aware my parents were hiring strangers off the street, she said, crossing her arms. That's funny. I shot back. They weren't aware their daughter was coming home after 12 years either. That earned a reaction. A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe. I had overheard Martha talking about Sophia, how she had been away at university for over a decade, studying to become a veterinarian. First undergrad, then vet school, then a doctorate. She had barely visited in all that time. You don't know anything about me, she said, her tone colder now. And you don't know anything about me, I countered. So maybe drop the attitude. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Then, before she could snap back, Harold came walking out of the barn, breaking the tension. Sophia. His face lit up as he saw her. The coldness in her expression softened just slightly as she turned toward him. Hey, Dad. She let herself be pulled into a hug, though I noticed she didn't fully relax into it. When did you decide to come back? He asked, stepping back and looking her over. Your mother didn't say anything. I wanted to surprise you, she said, forcing a small smile. And I needed a change of pace. Harold didn't question it, but I saw the concern flicker in his eyes. Sophia's gaze flickered back to me. And this guy? Harold clapped a hand on my shoulder. That's Nick. Best dam worker we've had in years. He's been helping out around the place. She didn't look impressed. Right? She said flatly. Well, hopefully, he's better with animals than he is with fences. I exhaled slowly, biting back a retort. I had barely met this woman, and already, she was under my skin. The next few days were tense. Sophia was everywhere. Checking on the horses, tending to the cattle, making sure everything was up to her standards. She had spent years studying animals, and now that she was back, it was clear she thought she was the only competent person on this ranch. The worst part? She was actually good at what she did. I had never seen someone handle an injured horse as quickly and efficiently as she did. She moved with practiced ease, her hands steady, her instructions clear. Even Luis, who didn't impress easily, had muttered something about her knowing her stuff. But when it came to me, she was relentless. You're holding the reins too tight, she snapped one morning as I struggled to keep one of the younger horses calm. I gritted my teeth. I know what I'm doing. Clearly you don't. I turned to glare at her, but she was already moving forward, taking the reins from my hands and demonstrating the proper grip. I hated how easily she did it. You can learn, or you can let the horse throw you, she said matter-of-factly, stepping back. I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. It went on like that for days. Little comments, sharp corrections, that permanent look of distrust in her eyes whenever she glanced at me. But here's the thing. The attraction was there. Neither of us would acknowledge it, but it was in the way we snapped at each other, the way our arguments felt charged with something unspoken. One evening, I was repairing another fence when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Sophia standing there, arms crossed, watching me. I wiped the sweat from my brow. What? You come to critique my hammering now? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Look, I don't trust people easily, especially not outsiders. I leaned on the fence post. That obvious? You just showed up out of nowhere, she said, eyes narrowing slightly. No background, no explanation. My parents might trust you, but I don't. I stared at her for a moment. Part of me wanted to tell her the truth, about Amanda, about the betrayal, about why I had really come here. But I couldn't. Instead, I just shrugged. Then don't trust me. She blinked, like she wasn't expecting that answer. I turned back to the fence, driving another nail into the wood. She didn't leave, and I wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The first sign that something was wrong came when Luis noticed a gap in the herd count. We had been rounding up cattle for a routine check, marking down each one as they moved through the corral. It was slow, tedious work, but necessary. Luis had been counting the cows the same way for years, by sight, instinct, and habit. So when he stopped, frowning at his clipboard, I knew something was off. Something wrong? I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. Luis didn't answer right away. He recounted, his weathered fingers tracing the tally marks. Then, he cursed under his breath. We're missing at least 30 head, he said grimly. I straightened. Are you sure? He shot me a look. I've been doing this since before you were born. Yeah, I'm sure. A cold feeling settled in my gut. Cattle don't just disappear. Maybe one or two could wander off if a fence broke, but 30? That wasn't an accident. We finished up with the remaining herd and checked the fences. Everything looked intact. No sign of a breach, no tracks leading off the property. It didn't make sense. That night, Luis and I went over the records. We double-checked every count from the past month. That's not all, he muttered, pointing at the logbook. If my numbers are right, we've lost more than just today's missing cows. This has been happening for a while. At least 250 are gone. I felt my stomach drop. You think someone's stealing them? Luis exhaled, rubbing his face. Ain't no other explanation. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. Who the hell would be dumb enough to steal from us? Luis leaned back, his gaze darkening. I gotta guess. I already knew the name before he said it. Richard Coleman. He owned the neighboring ranch. Big operation. A man with too much money and not enough morals. Harold had told me stories about him. Land disputes, shady dealings, undercutting smaller ranchers whenever he could. But cattle theft? That was next level. Luis and I decided to investigate. We didn't tell Harold or Martha. Not yet. If Richard really was behind this, we needed proof before we made any accusations. So, that night, we took the truck and parked near the north fence line, where our ranch met Richard's. If cows were being stolen, this was the most likely route. We waited. Hours passed. The night air was thick with the smell of dust and cattle. Then, around 2 a.m., we saw them. A group of men on horseback, moving silently under the cover of darkness. They worked fast, cutting through the fence just enough to push the cattle through, then herding them toward Richard's land. Luis and I exchanged a look. Son of a bitch, I muttered. Luis reached for his rifle, but I grabbed his arm. Not yet. We need to follow them. We moved carefully, keeping our truck lights off as we followed at a distance. The thieves led the cattle toward one of Richard's back barns, away from the main roads. The setup was too precise, too organized to be anything but an inside job. Looks like they've been doing this for months, Luis whispered. I gritted my teeth. We need to tell Harold. Luis nodded. And the sheriff. The next morning, Harold was livid. I knew that bastard was up to something, he growled, pacing the living room. But stealing from us? That's crossing the line. We have to handle this right, I said. If we go in guns blazing, we give him an excuse to play the victim. Harold clenched his fists. We need proof solid enough to get the law involved. That's when Sophia got involved. She overheard us talking and insisted on helping. You'll need evidence, right? I know how to set up trail cams. If we put them along the fence line, we'll catch them in the act. I didn't want her involved, not just because of the danger, but because I didn't want to be responsible for her getting hurt. But Sophia wasn't the type to back down. So, we set up the cameras. 3 nights later, we had the proof we needed. Clear as day, Richard's men, moving cattle onto his land. We brought everything to the sheriff. It should have been over then, but things got worse. A few days later, Sophia went out to check on the river where the cattle drank. She didn't come back. I felt uneasy the moment I realized how long she had been gone. Sophia's not back yet? I asked Martha. She shook her head, worry creeping into her eyes. She said she was just going to check the water levels. Something was wrong. I grabbed my truck keys and took off toward the river. The moment I got there, I saw her cornered by 4 men. They were rough-looking, the kind of guys you didn't cross in a dark alley. They had knives, ropes, intentions that made my blood boil. I didn't think. I acted. I hit the gas, my truck barreling straight toward them. The men scattered as I jumped out. Get the hell away from her. One of them lunged at me. I dodged, slamming my fist into his jaw. Another one swung a knife. I barely avoided it before grabbing a rock and smashing it into his face. Sophia fought too. She kicked one guy so hard in the groin he dropped like a sack of bricks. One of them tried to grab her, but I tackled him before he could. We wrestled in the dirt, his knife coming dangerously close, but I managed to knock it away before slamming his head into the ground. By the time the dust settled, 2 of them were unconscious. One was bleeding from his nose, and the last one took off running. Sophia was shaking, but she was safe. Are you okay? I asked, breathless. She nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, thanks to you. The sheriff showed up minutes later, and so did Richard. He tried to talk his way out of it, tried to act like it was a misunderstanding. But we had evidence. The stolen cattle, the trail cam footage, the armed men on his payroll caught attacking Sophia. Richard was arrested. As they dragged him away, he shot me a look of pure hatred. This ain't over, he spat. I didn't say anything, but as I stood next to Sophia, her breathing still unsteady from what just happened, I realized something. I wasn't just running anymore. I had something worth fighting for. After the night by the river, everything changed. Sophia had always been difficult, sharp, guarded, constantly challenging me. But now, something was different. The disdain in her eyes was gone, replaced with something else. Something she didn't want to admit. She wasn't exactly warm, but she wasn't as cold either. The sarcastic remarks were still there, but the venom was missing. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch her watching me. The first few days after the attack, she was quiet, shaken, but too proud to admit it. She threw herself into work, barely stopping to breathe. But one evening, when I walked into the barn to check on a sick calf, I found her sitting on a bale of hay, staring at the floor, her hands clenched into fists. She looked up when she heard me. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She exhaled sharply. Not really. I leaned against the wall, waiting. Finally, she spoke. You could have been killed that night, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I shrugged. So could you. She flinched. I didn't push her. I just waited. After a long silence, she muttered. I didn't think you were that kind of guy. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of guy? The kind who'd run into a fight for someone else, she admitted. I let out a dry chuckle. I didn't think you were the kind of woman who needed saving. That got a reaction. Her mouth quirked slightly, but she still looked tense. I sat down next to her, careful not to crowd her space. I'm guessing this isn't just about that night. She hesitated, then let out a slow breath. I spent years thinking I had life figured out. Studying, working, pushing forward. I never had time for anything else. Now I'm back here, and I feel like I don't know where I belong. I understood that feeling all too well. Maybe you're just looking in the wrong places, I said. She glanced at me, something unreadable in her eyes. And where do you belong? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I don't know, I admitted. But for now, here feels like a good start. Sophia didn't reply. But for the first time since I met her, she didn't argue. The shift in our relationship was slow, like an old engine struggling to start. Sophia was still stubborn, still bossy, still drove me insane on a daily basis. But there were moments now, small ones, that weren't filled with bickering. She started bringing me coffee in the mornings without making a big deal about it. She asked for my help with the horses instead of ordering me around. And one evening, when she thought no one was watching, I saw her smile at me. Not a sarcastic smirk, a real, genuine smile. Of course, she immediately ruined the moment by telling me I smelled like manure. Progress. It wasn't until a few weeks later that things really changed. I was fixing the old barn roof when I heard yelling from the clinic. Sophia had been using a small space near the ranch to treat sick animals, but she had been talking about expanding. A real veterinary clinic, something more permanent. She had the skills, but she didn't have the funds. I climbed down from the roof just in time to see her arguing with a man in a suit. You can't just take it, she snapped, arms crossed. The man sighed. I'm not taking anything, Sophia. I'm just saying the lease is up, and if you can't pay, someone else will. I stepped closer. Problem? Sophia shot me a look that clearly said stay out of it, but the man turned toward me, eyeing me like I was dirt under his shoe. Who's this? He asked. None of your business, I said flatly. What's going on? Sophia huffed. The clinic space is getting taken by some real estate developer. Apparently, I don't make enough money to keep it. I glanced at the man. How much? The man looked amused. A lot more than she can afford. Sophia's jaw tightened. I could tell she hated this. Feeling powerless, being talked down to. I didn't think. I just pulled out my checkbook. The man's smirk disappeared when I wrote the full amount on the spot. Here's your rent, I said, handing it to him. Now get lost. Sophia's eyes widened. The man sputtered for a second but, seeing no argument left, took the check and left. The second he was gone, Sophia turned on me. What the hell was that? I shrugged. Seemed like you needed a clinic. She threw up her hands. You can't just throw money at things. Why not? It worked. Sophia groaned, rubbing her temples. You're impossible. I smirked. And yet, you haven't kicked me off the ranch. She scowled. But then, after a long moment, her expression softened. Why did you really do that? She asked quietly. I hesitated. Because I believe in you, I said finally. And because I know you'd never ask for help, even if you needed it. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to figure me out. And then, in the most unexpected move of all, she kissed me. It wasn't slow or hesitant. It was frustrated, desperate, like she had been fighting it for too long. By the time she pulled away, she looked just as surprised as I felt. That was stupid, she muttered. I grinned. Want to do it again? She rolled her eyes, but she didn't say no. That was the night everything really changed. Sophia and I were officially together. I helped her build the clinic, bought the equipment, found a better location, helped renovate the space. It wasn't just about the money. It was about giving her something that was hers, something she could build with her own hands. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something too. Not running, not hiding, just starting over, with someone who finally saw me for who I really was. For months, I told myself I had moved on. I had built a new life in Willow Creek, found real work, real purpose. I had Sophia, the ranch, the clinic, everything that mattered. But deep down, I knew there was one last thing left unfinished. Amanda. She was nothing more than a ghost now, a mistake I had erased from my life. But legally, she was still my wife. And that meant she still had the potential to cause trouble. I didn't trust her to let things go. She was greedy. She was vindictive. And if she ever found out how much money I really had, she would try to rip my life apart all over again. I had to end this. Permanently. I reached out to George. The guy had been my lifeline when I first disappeared, and I still owed him for helping me trade my Tesla for the SUV that got me here. He was the only one from my past I still trusted. Nick? His voice came through the line, surprised. Man, I didn't think I'd hear from you again. I need one last favor. I said. He didn't even hesitate. What's up? I need you to find Amanda. Make her an offer. There was a long pause. You sure about that? Yeah, I said. It's time to put this to rest. George sighed. All right, I'll track her down. What's the offer? $150,000. Cash. She signs the divorce papers, takes the money, and we never speak again. He let out a low whistle. Damn, that's generous. It's enough to make her walk away without a fight. George didn't argue. All right, I'll handle it. Give me a few days. It only took him 3. When George called back, I could hear the tension in his voice. Found her. I exhaled. Where? Some dive motel outside of Denver, he said. She's been working at a diner. Place is a dump. She looks like hell. I didn't feel bad. Amanda had always lived like she was untouchable. She thought she could cheat, steal from me, throw me away like I was nothing. But I had one. What did she say? I asked. George let out a dry chuckle. Man, you should have seen her face when I told her you were alive. Thought she saw a damn ghost. I smirked. At first, she was pissed, George continued. Started demanding where the rest of the money went. Said you owed her half. I clenched my jaw. But when I told her the deal was $150,000 or nothing, she shut up real fast. And she agreed. A weight lifted off my chest. I wasn't surprised that Amanda took the money. She wasn't loyal. She wasn't the type to fight for something unless it directly benefited her. The second she realized this was the best deal she was gonna get, she folded. She'll sign the papers, George confirmed. I'll overnight them to you once I have them in hand. Thanks, man, I said. Anytime, he replied. Then, after a pause, so, you happy? I thought about it. For the first time in my life? Yeah, I was finally free. Richard Coleman was sitting in a jail cell, and his ranch was up for sale. It was poetic, really. The man who had stolen from us, who had threatened Sophia, who had tried to run this town with fear and intimidation. Now, he had nothing. His land, his cattle, his legacy, all of it was up for grabs. And I was about to take it. I had more than enough money to disappear. That was my original plan. But this wasn't about escaping anymore. This was about building something real. I had $12 million sitting in an offshore account. Money I had hidden to protect myself from Amanda. Money that was untouched, waiting for a purpose. I found it. Buying Coleman Ranch wasn't just business. It was personal. This land had been the site of theft, corruption, and near-death experiences. But under my name, it would be a fresh start. The deal was silent, quick, and undisclosed. I had lawyers handle everything through a third-party buyer. No one knew it was me. Not even Sophia. Once the paperwork was finalized, I immediately started the reconstruction. Richard's house was massive but rotting, a symbol of his greed and neglect. I had it gutted. New foundation, new walls, new life. I hired the best local builders and worked beside them every day, hammering, sawing, pouring sweat into something that was becoming ours. The barn was rebuilt from scratch. The fencing was reinforced. The land, mistreated for years, was finally getting the care it deserved. It took months, but when it was done, it wasn't Richard's ranch anymore. It was ours. I waited until the living room was finished. The house had been rebuilt from the ground up, but this room, this was where it would all happen. The floors were polished wood, the walls painted in warm tones. A stone fireplace sat against the far wall, the first fire burning low as I waited. Sophia walked in, completely unaware. She froze. Her eyes darted around the space, taking in the details. What is this place? She asked slowly. I took a deep breath. It was time. I dropped to one knee. Sophia's hands flew to her mouth. You. I pulled the ring from my pocket. Simple, elegant, perfect. This is our home now, I said. I bought it. I rebuilt it. And now, I want to build something even bigger. With you. She was already crying. Marry me, Sophia. She didn't hesitate. Yes. She launched herself at me, knocking me backward onto the floor, laughing, kissing, breathless. For the first time in my life, I had no doubts, no fears, no second thoughts. I had found home, and she had said yes. Harold leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, studying me with that same quiet intensity that had once made me nervous. Now, it just meant he was thinking, measuring my words, weighing the risk. You really want to do this? He finally asked, eyes locked onto mine. I nodded. Yeah, I do. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. You just bought Richard's old place. Why would you want to tie it to ours? I leaned forward. Because together, We'd be unstoppable. Harold raised an eyebrow. Look, I continued. Your ranch has been in your family for generations. You've built something great, but you and Martha can't run this place forever. And Coleman's land? It's been mismanaged for years, but now that it's mine, I can turn it into something better. Harold didn't say anything. If we combine them, I said, we're talking over 15,000 hectares of land. That's not just a ranch, Harold. That's an empire. Harold let out a slow whistle. I let my words settle in before delivering the final piece. And I want Luis to run it. That got his attention. He sat up straighter, eyes narrowing slightly. Luis? I nodded. He's been loyal to you for years. He knows this land better than anyone. He's old school, but he gets the work done. You put him in charge, and we never have to worry about management. Harold considered that. Then he chuckled. Jesus, kid, he muttered. You come out here, get your hands dirty for a few months, and now you're talking about running the biggest damn ranch in the county. I shrugged. When I commit to something, I go all in. Harold studied me for another long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. Let's do it. The merger took time. We had to combine records, legal paperwork, finances. I brought in a lawyer to finalize the land agreements so there was no risk of disputes later. When everything was said and done, we weren't two separate ranches anymore. We were one, and that meant we needed a team. Luis took the role of head manager, but the workload was massive. We needed more people, so we hired them. Wes Parker, a former rodeo rider, built like a tank, but quieter than a church mouse. The guy didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He took charge of the livestock rotation. Jake Morrison, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and a born horse whisperer. He was in charge of the stables and breeding program. Tanner Briggs, an ex-oil field worker, looking for a fresh start. The guy had mechanic skills, so we put him on equipment repair and maintenance. Billy and Travis Dalton, twin brothers, rough around the edges, but knew how to handle cattle. They ran the daily herding and branding operations. Hank Evans, a retired Marine, who had a zero-tolerance policy for laziness. He managed the security and supply chain logistics. Lena Carter, one of the best dam veterinarians in the region, and someone Sophia personally hired to help with the clinic and animal care. Benji Flores, young, eager, and learning fast. He was the go-to guy for anything and everything, willing to put in the hours. 8 new hires. A completely rebuilt ranch. A team that worked like a machine. For the first time in decades, this land was running exactly how it was supposed to. One evening, I stood on the porch of the new house, watching the sun dip below the hills. Sophia walked up beside me, wrapping her arms around my waist. You really did it, she murmured, pressing her cheek against my chest. I kissed the top of her head. We did it. She pulled back, looking at me with a soft smile. So what now? I exhaled, glancing out over the land that stretched for miles. Now, we built a legacy. The day of our wedding arrived on a crisp autumn morning, with golden leaves swirling through the breeze and the sky stretched wide in a perfect shade of blue. The ranch had never looked more beautiful. The newly rebuilt house stood tall in the distance, the surrounding pastures rolling endlessly under the sun, and the scent of fresh hay and earth filled the air. Harold and Martha had insisted we get married right here, on the land we had built together. It felt right. There was no grand ballroom, no church, no over-the-top spectacle, just family, friends, and the open sky. Luis stood next to me, his usual gruff exterior cracked just slightly with something like pride. He'd been skeptical about me when I first arrived, but now, he was more than a mentor. He was family. You nervous? He muttered, straightening his tie. Not even a little, I said, adjusting my cuffs. And it was true. For the first time in my life, I wasn't second-guessing anything. I wasn't calculating risk or looking for an escape route. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then, the music started. Everyone turned as Sophia appeared, walking toward me, and my breath caught in my chest. She was stunning. Her long, ivory dress flowed like water, her dark chestnut hair tumbling in soft waves around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that did it. Fierce, full of fire, full of love. I had seen her angry, stubborn, frustrated beyond belief. I had seen her exhausted, pushing through long days, refusing to quit. I had seen her vulnerable, scared, unwilling to let anyone in. But this was Sophia at peace. And she was mine. When she reached me, she took my hands without hesitation, gripping them tight. You ready for this, city boy? She whispered, smirking. Born ready, ranch girl, I whispered back. The ceremony was perfect. Simple. Real. Everything I had never known I needed. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I didn't waste a second. I pulled her in, kissed her so hard I heard Martha laugh and Luis mutter something about "damn kids." She was laughing against my lips when we pulled apart, her hands still gripping mine like she never wanted to let go. And I knew, in that moment, she never would. The ranch flourished. The merger with Harold's Land had turned it into the biggest, most successful cattle operation in the county. With Luis running the daily operations, the team working like a well-oiled machine, and Sophia managing the veterinary clinic, we were pulling in more money than I ever expected. Over $3 million a year. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about what we built. This land, these people, this life, it was ours. I was no longer some runaway man trying to disappear. I was a rancher, a businessman, a husband. And then, one evening, Sophia walked into the house with a look in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. She stood in the doorway for a second, watching me as I poured a drink, her hands fidgeting slightly, a rare sight for her. I set the glass down. Something wrong? She took a deep breath. Then, with a slow, cautious smile, she said, "I'm pregnant." For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly speechless. I stared at her, my brain short-circuiting, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Nick," she said, her voice hesitant. And then I was moving, crossing the room in 2 strides, wrapping her up in my arms, lifting her off the ground as she let out a startled laugh. I kissed her, deep and sure, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Are you happy?" she asked against my lips. I cupped her face, looking into the only pair of eyes I ever wanted to wake up to for the rest of my life. "More than I ever thought I could be," I whispered, because I finally had everything I had ever needed. A home, a family, a future, and most importantly a love that was real.